Citation, please, with WAPTEC. This is an opinion piece. It has no origin story or basis in reality, fact, citation, whatever, because we've had too many years of us discussing it. Google and YouTube have stated that they will not filter out misinformation on the subject, and yet they flag your channel for repeating and including a link to the World Health Organization and to the CDC, which I will include in the video, just because that's the only thing that's going to be in the video. I'm literally daring Google and YouTube to promote misinformation by stating they won't stop it and then go after people who include a link to the only two things that they link to, because their bot believes in opposite day shit. Sorry for the complaint, but let's get this out of the way. The lab leak theory is bullshit. I don't want to hear about furin cleavages and everything else people do a thumbnail sketch kind of idea of, because they read a couple of Wikipedia articles and try to get something out of it so they can keep promoting whatever they believe. If you start with a belief that's very strong, that's called a bias. It doesn't matter if you're right, you're still biased. Gravity exists and holds us to the surface of the earth. I have a bias about this. It doesn't change whether it's a fact or not. Okay? It also doesn't change whether I'm wrong or I'm repeating information from someone who's wrong. If we're going to repeat information from a source, it should be someone who hasn't been wrong repeatedly and refuses to admit it. Yes, I'm talking about Trump heads, not Donald Trump. Not even trying to cite him in any of this, because that's not relevant. That's like citing the Kardashians. Who gives a shit, right? Let's talk about something quick. No, Fauci is not part of a conspiracy of whatever you're talking about. Fauci's part of a conspiracy, if you want to call it a conspiracy, because the word conspiracy can be interpreted positively or negatively. A group of people trying to promote a specific outcome and a specific belief by everybody who are willing to not give out all the information. Now that sounds really damning, except it's medical science, and learning every goddamn Latin phrase might take you a little bit of time. Okay, it might take you 12 fucking years to be even partially competent, and some of those doctors out there aren't, you might have noticed. But it's still, up to a decade or more of not being an idiot. Okay, it takes a long time. It's not 10,000 hours like learning the guitar, okay? So he's going to leave out some information, because he's a researcher, and what he knows is shit that isn't even in books yet sometimes, okay? Same thing with the guy who's a contrarian saying it has to be a lab leak, because both sides says that you can have the debate. We can have the debate. So we're going to do the debate in the video here by me presenting a straw man that proves the Wuhan lab, the lab near Wuhan did it. Okay, here we go. How do you set up a lab to do virus testing? If you're not aware of it, when you do any form of biological activity in a lab, you're going to find what's called a genetic or biological or animal tissue weed. In every lab, when you sterilize it to the point that literally nothing's alive, and you do experiments for cancer research or any research, you're going to find this one weed in every single lab, because it always shows up, because the lab ever had this genetic sequence in it. And it's from a lady who died from cancer. It's an immortal cell line that people have trouble trying to kill. It's the reason it gets everywhere. From a woman who had a form of cancer that was so ridiculously aggressive that it's become a test subject, like a lab rat, for every lab you need, because you can grow it practically anywhere. In fact, it's found where it shouldn't be. Okay, that's how bad an infection rate can be in a sterile environment. Okay? Because there's no such thing as a completely sterile environment unless you blast it with heat, radiation, and chemical treatments in the actual order of cleaning things, then chemically blasting it, then radiation, then heat. You can do them in any sequence, but that's the usual one. And you'll still find that genetic immortal cell line from a cancer that happened to a woman who died decades ago. Why? Life finds a way. All right? That's a living thing, not a virus. Viruses normally die if they're exposed to just air. But they're encapsulated in something else that y'all looked up at one point. So, You have a lab where you're doing experiments by testing whether or not you can get this genetic sequence to do something. You decided gain of function's happening. Okay. Did any of you look up how often this fails? No, you didn't. You wouldn't be watching this video done by some idiot who really... I look like the stereotypical scary admin on Reddit, okay? The point, by the way, everybody pointing out that I resemble some character in some sci-fi movie or TV show, cool. The rest of you that are coming up with weird fan art, I really have no idea. What color is the sky in your universe? I'm really curious. Seriously. Maybe the internet's a portal. But anyway, let's get on with it. Under conditions that you're doing gain of function or anything involving viruses, the failure rate is ridiculously high. Okay? But it's possible. That's the dangling bullshit at the end, way down there, 15 football fields away you're grasping at. Okay? And I'm trying to make this sound good. There is biological and genetic competition inside of a lab that makes it to where an experiment that should work will eventually fail. Science is reproducible, but it has a percentage of reproducibility. Right? Okay. Some things are really easy to do. The shit most of you who are politically and ideologically minded, or worse, just contrarians, or even worse than that, just armchair experts typing, is shit that has a failure rate of like 2,000 to 1. It's really, really hard to do these experiments. That's why it's so fucking expensive. The expense comes from sterilizing things and still failing at it, because you still see something that shouldn't even be in the damn petri dish come up. Okay? We can't sterilize non-dairy creamer in this country without having uranium in it, okay? What do you think is going to go on in a lab, okay? All right. Or you do the other method for it. Now, stay with me. Let's do an experiment where we're trying to get a natural selection thing to happen faster. We need a disease on purpose. We're engineering it. Yes, I'm going to bring up the Army Corps of Engineers, but you won't realize it, but I just said it. You're trying to breed a better virus. I'm not going to tell you what for, but let's do it. And you want something that transmits really easily. And a lot of the diseases that attack humans can be traced through zootonic, or whatever they call it, transmission between animals. Okay, cool. How does it happen? In the natural world, diseases can mingle together. We expect that. But viruses do it a surprising amount of time where they mix together because two viruses attack the same host. Every one of you is being attacked by millions of different types of bacteria, but usually only 1 or 2 dozen viruses at the same time. But we're a petri dish, we're a growth medium, and more importantly, a breeding ground. And in the case of viruses, they don't mix together. We call it sexual reproduction. This is a variation of it that happens with viruses because the same virus will attack eventually the same cell. 2 viruses will attack at the same time, and the genetics get mixed up. If you don't believe that could possibly happen, I don't know why you'd even be discussing it. Okay? What's easier? A petri dish with a fixed number of cells that we grew on purpose for doing this. By the way, if you're not aware of it, in some cases, using that genetic line I talked about for some god-awful reason, because it works. But we do that trying to create something, mostly so we can predict what will happen in the next 10 years. Okay, cool. Or we set up your average farmer's market and allow people to bring in domesticated animals for food production and mix them with pet animals and mix them with wild animals, and not just local ones, but exotic wild animals. Let's just see if this could happen and do something terrible like it would. And for the fuck of it, let's put the bats in cages directly above all the other animals, because that's totally the best idea right now. Which one do you think is going to have a larger number of successful replications of a contagious disease? It doesn't matter if you and I get it. We're not talking about you and me. We're trying to get those viruses to reproduce. Department of Agriculture experiments on creating mutations in corn, 1947. That's a fake citation. Yeah, because I'm going to make some of you who are really curious go look up the 400 occurrences of it. Trying to get animal viruses to infect plants. by having it enrich, quote, the dung, by putting birds, bats, literally everything they could come up with, trying to create a soil with so many different types of viruses in it that whatever virus might communicate into the animals and plants would show up early in controlled conditions in a burn room where they would incinerate everything while it screamed if necessary. But they wanted to see what would become contagious early on, but they had to isolate it because that's totally going to work. Caused an outbreak. They didn't do it in the United States, though. Country name redacted because apparently we're responsible for killing off several thousand people. But that totally didn't happen. Now, review here. I'm citing a bullshit fake story here. I'm not going to give you a citation, but you're going to go look it up and find out there's 100 examples of this shit. And it wasn't just the United States, it's Britain and every other country doing the same shit. Russia did this shit too. They would pick an isolated area and try to cause viruses to happen early in a controlled situation where they could get samples, burn it, create a vaccine, or at least figure out what the fuck it'll do. Why? Because the animals themselves are a better petri dish than a petri dish. Because doing this has worked. The original flu that went through in 1918, we call it Spanish flu, but it was actually a Kansas flu. I think it was actually Kansas. It's somewhere in the United States, in the heartland. Because there was a military base and everybody shipped out to go to a war of some time. You might have heard about it. It was the first one that was big. But it was most likely caused by birds and animals mixing together. And it could have even been bats. We don't even know. Because these happen under uncontrolled conditions. You know, reality. Where do you think... only a disease can only happen if it's done in the lab is one presumption. I know none of you are going to say that unless you're really fucking crazy. Or, every disease we know of happens in nature, and I don't give a fuck if you like this, through natural selection, not microevolution, but evolution, because it's rapid, because they rapidly evolve compared to humans. Viruses and diseases happen in nature much more efficiently. So over here you have a wet market doing the same thing. Yes, I was citing shit that was done by the U.S. government and every other government back before we finally decided trying to do that, even if it's just to make it to where we have soil that's extremely infectious and testable against crops. That was actually one of the original ideas. And eventually it became, no, let's do this so that we have a breeding ground for diseases so we can see what's going to come up. Just let's make it happen early so we can find it. Maybe we can use it as a weapon. You know, military people. Screwballs. But that kind of thing produces the same failure rate. Let's say it's just as bad at it as a lab. Okay? Or just as good. Would it happen more often if you just left it to go out of control? Or do you really believe it would be less likely somehow under those conditions? Are you really, really that kind of person who believes that even though nature literally causes viruses and diseases and plagues, it has to be a lab leak? You really believe this? Why? What is the compelling reason to do that? Because people say we shouldn't say it's impossible? Okay, again, it's a room that's sterilizing things, and the most likely weed or accident or leak is a disease that can't do anything in those conditions that happened a long time ago from a lady who died from cancer in the United States. That's more likely to find in a lab than some new goddamn disease. By the way, the Wuhan labs weren't necessarily burn rooms, but they had at least one burn room I got to read about once, but who cares? The point is, under those conditions, which fail, if you're not aware of it, a lot more often than your average farm, why are you still even talking about this? Because someone said it that you feel is important. Most of you don't even realize who came up with this idea. Okay, blaming it on the lab nearby. And yes, a lab leak is extremely likely. No, I'm not kidding, it is. If they were doing something directly related, and you can find evidence. But no, just because you don't want to believe what you're told by one political party or another, because they just repeat what scientists tell them, that's not contrarianism, that's suicide. Every one of you has gotten through an end-of-the-world scenario, Keter level, and seen the stupid people do this shit. And some of you are looking in the mirror and saying, I'm the problem. Some of you look in the mirror and say, I'm the solution. Neither is really correct. The problem is, nature finds a way, and we're in its way. Thank you for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. Bye.